So I think it's my job to bring the day to a close. I think a lot of what we were hoping to accomplish here today is what we're doing right now, which is having this sort of rich discussion and different perspectives and different stakeholders and coming in and viewing what we're doing from different angles. And I think what we really want to become is a richer community with more options. I think if anything, you know, what patients also want is the fact that there are more options, right? So I think part of the desperation and the feeling of helplessness is that there are not more options. And I think that extends from the preclinical to the clinical space. I mean, it's not, I don't think we're talking about options as simply you know, having a drug in clinic that's helping. I think it's even having ideas on how to tackle and how to change maybe you know, the future of your child and knowing what's going to happen in the next decade or two. We had a board call last week, and we got all the work groups together to comment on what they thought would be the goals that they would like to have in 2016. And I know we've had sort of a long day and everybody's sort of exhausted their brains, but I thought I would just put this little wish list together that Rosina and Inna compiled as something for you to take home and continue pondering. And now, after our long discussion today, many things may have changed. I think this morning we, during a little board meeting, decided what we were going to put together was a little wish list, or what was the term? Wedding registry. A wedding registry for ALD Connect. And I think that's, you know, has a nice sort of touch as we're all sort of coming together in a festive ceremony. Felix Austria nubet. Ali, you remember that? Happy Austria marries. So, yeah, so Bob had this nice statement. It is amazing what you can accomplish if you do not care who gets the credit, right? And I think that really holds true here too, and that we should really give us all credit for this discussion and this open exchange, and the fact that we're willing to share and think together and listen to each other. So I think let's see how far my brain takes me through this list, and but I think it might help us summarize some of the things we said today, and then there'll be other things that are missing. But in terms of data repositories, we want to have more data entry into Neurobank. Clearly, I think this is what we can all agree upon. We need all phenotypes represented. We need enough power, enough size to make statements about disease progression, about understanding the natural history in order to really enable trial design for all phenotypes of ALD. We need to know what we're trying to change, and unless we have large enough numbers, we cannot determine what that margin of difference is that is clinically meaningful to patients. We've decided that we want additional support for site coordinators. This is something we're actively working on. We're going to put together additional contracts for the different sites in order to enable more entry into Neurobank. We want to roll out the global unique identifier to biospecimen, and I think we had a very nice session on how that works in the ALS field and how we're now going to institute that in ALD Connect. Really, 2016, we want worldwide engagement, right? I mean, we're looking to the UK, we're looking to other countries around the world to say anybody who, you know, has a skin in the game, so to speak, and who really wants to help enable trials, we need numbers everywhere, right? So this is a rare disease. Unless we're all working together, we're not going to make things happen. So I'm so happy Stefan is here and others, and we want to work with Ela, and I think we all basically have the same challenge, and whatever it takes. If it's just a matter of harmonizing or collecting in the same way and then being able to compare, right? That's all it takes. So we want material for the patient portal. So I think looking here to Janice and Amber and many others in the patient community. If the relevant topics, Joan, I know you have another survey waiting that needs to go into the patient portal. Those are the kinds of things that need to be done. We need to understand, how do we engage patients better? What is it in Facebook that makes them go to 600 people, liking us, but we don't have those numbers yet on the patient portal? So I think that's really important. Education and outreach here. Work Group 4 has done such a terrific job, and really, it's all that hard work of all the patient advocacy groups, and Jean Kelly, Lisa Seeger, Janice, so many others. So I'm humbled by that effort, and all I can say, please continue. Please help improve the website. Let social media grow. Let's increase resources. Let's find ways to enhance communication between patients and with physicians, and raise more awareness. A lot of this will come now that I think newborn screening is starting. So I think a lot of this I already said. I'm not going to go through all this in detail. Where is it? Using Hootsuite for social media posts. Rosina or Inna, do you want to comment on that?
You want me to comment on what we've already achieved?
Yes.
In Work Group 4?
And tell us what Hootsuite is.
So for Work Group 4 with education and outreach, we have a new website that's already in production. The homepage is already done, and a new company that we're working with is already working through the new pages. The new website is going to allow us to post resources easier, to post webinars and videos. For example, the recording of this session right now, our website right now cannot arrange so many talks on there on the page. The new website will allow for that. We'll be able to have a shopping cart so that we can sell ALD products or anything to promote any other organization that has anything they would like to fundraise on. Easier navigation. There's going to be just a lot of functions and plugins that we can put in to make it easier for people to find things. We find it really hard to connect pages when you're going from one tab to another. It's really confusing for people. For the patient portal, we have a new survey in plans. We have more webinars that are in the plans for this year. And for social media, we've been using Hootsuite as of this year, and Brian and his wife have been doing a great job with Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all of our pages using Hootsuite that allows us to post once and just send it to all of these different social media outlets so that it reaches as many people as possible. We've also been sending emails on a mass mailing list that we've had that's been collecting emails, but we just didn't actually use it in the beginning, and now we're sending weekly announcements, and our email list has grown by over 200 people just in less than the last year. So it's great, and we're getting more email questions and a lot of responses to it. So the engagement has been much, much higher in ALD Connect.
Great, thanks. And I knew you could do that much better than I could. So I think on that note also, just recognizing how our community has grown over the past year and how much more content and activity is occurring that I'm not able to keep up with all the different work groups. So we've really, I think, recognizing is, Inna is going to take a stronger role in Work Group 4. Rosina is going to help more in the Work Group 3 in terms of some of the biomarker and candidate drug evaluation work, as well as in Work Group 2, where Priya is also helping for the neurobank entry. And I think this kind of division of labor will help us properly move forward and get better workflow going. So I think that's fantastic. Resource for patients. Again, this is work that's coming out of Work Group 4. Written resources that deal with tips and tricks from experienced families, physicians, and nurses for patient care, symptomatic treatment lists, known drugs, exercises. I think all these are sort of resources and help patients raise awareness towards their physicians. and again, I think this is material that work group 4 will share, and anybody can get in touch with Inna as well as Bob and to participate. So I think, Kathleen, you spoke this morning a lot about plans around fundraising and all you've learned in Hollywood after being at an awardee at the Global Genes award session. So I won't put you here on the spot, but I think it's going to be key for us to be sustainable, to understand how we get a consistent funding a source going. I think we want to really diversify our approach. I mean, I think we have the strength of being a community with academic, industry, and patient advocacy ties. We want to fully exploit all of those. We want to apply for the NIH grants. We've been lucky with PCORI. We have nice career development grants going, but we should get multi-center NIH grants up and running. We should ask our industry friends what is it worth it to them, and what do they want to support, and really also reach out to philanthropy to help things going. I think we're about to sort of hit a point of nice synergy. So reorganization, centralization of governance, administrative resources and documents. So I think we're in the next year also going to get to the point where we're going to put together a committee that's going to deal with clinical trials, and I think we're going to make much better use of some of the physician scientists here in the room, where we can really let them do what they do best, namely sort of help them run trials and help them guide outcome measures, and leave some of the administrative and governance work to a group of people who are going to make that more efficient. Okay, so it's been a long day. I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I really am so appreciative of everybody bringing their comments and questions. So, Saku.
Thank you very much. It's been an excellent day, very productive. I wanted to ask one question, and that is, where you want to do science, patient advocacy, and industry together, I had just a thought, and maybe people are doing this already, and that is, while you focused on the biochemistry of the disease, and that brought attention to ALD, of course, but subsequently, when the gene was found, there was no, or at least I haven't seen much literature on the genotype-phenotype correlations. And for instance, if you were to show that there are, maybe Stefan has it, I don't know, but the patients sometimes like to access and say, if I have a mutation like this, how have others done? And also, if you were to find like small molecules that can read through truncations and so forth, then you will find something that industry will jump into. And then patients will be more than interested in jumping in. And I don't know if you have such a setup in your database planned or studied.
So I can speak briefly to that, and I know this sort of genotype-phenotype correlation has been a long discussion. It dates back many years. We were actually here in Boston shortly after Hugo passed, and we had a very nice session where we spoke at depth about that. We are revisiting this topic, and we're doing this, with next generation sequencing, really going for whole exome, maybe whole genome. Kendrick Goss, who spoke earlier, he is really taking the lead, helping supply the technology to undertake some of that sequencing. I think you're absolutely right. I think it is worth revisiting. It's worth thinking about things we've never thought about before. The whole, we have not really thought much about, the role of messenger RNAs or protein binding in this disorder, or other aspects of protein biology that have completely changed the field of ALS, right? I think there are various different chapters here, and I know what is happening in Duchenne or Fragile X or epigenetic modification stories. So I think all of these we should stay open and aware to. And I think this comes back to that aspect that's come up several times also from industry, sort of that openness, being open to new biology, right? We don't want to close the door by saying, okay, we're just focused on outcome measures of whatever we think is currently the right target. We want to keep that iron hot on the basic side and keep that really innovating, and that's what's going to keep us rich as a community. So absolutely. Yeah.
You specifically had two questions. You gave, it's absolutely true what you say, but Saku, you had two specific questions, because you asked whether patients can have access to information regarding their specific mutation. And you asked, how did others do? I get that question a lot. And it's a very dangerous question, because first of all, almost all families have unique mutations. So there are, in general, not many others who share that mutation. But we do know from those mutations that have been found multiple times that you can get any phenotype with those mutations. And I'm still, I get these questions also from people who know the disease, and it's often, I'm so often that they still think, oh yeah, but this mutation has been linked to cerebral ALD. So even people who are knowledgeable of the disease, they think that, so that it's kind of dangerous because if you're not deep enough in this disease, you may think, oh yeah, this mutation has been associated with AMN, but that's.
Sorry, they are spared with that particular mutation.
We have published some of those mutations.
Yeah,
yes,
I think you have.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that.
Yeah, that's why we published it.
No. But what I'm saying is, it's good for a family also.
Yeah, but it's no guarantee.
Even though it may be just one other person with that mutation somewhere, in, let's say, Indonesia. And so they may not know this, or their physician may not have read. But in another disease, which I also participate in, the whole thing is public knowledge. Anybody can go into it, and the physician can go into it, and then they can contact the person maintaining the registry to ask about their experience. Not the patient per se, but the physician.
But most of the mutations that are in the database, they come from literature, and most people who have identified those mutations do not see the patients anymore. And we know that phenotypes can change. So the mutation may have been reported as an Edison only or an AMN, but that may have been 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But
on the allow me to interrupt, and that is, it is not even being done commonly. All we do is long chain fatty acids, and we stop with it. What I'm saying is
no.
Well, I don't know.
Not in
Ali,
Amsterdam, not
how
in
often
Minnesota. Yes.
You always do mutation?
Oh yeah, yes.
I think that while at Minnesota and Mass General and Johns Hopkins, we always do testing. Many patients do not have genetic testing when they come to us that have been followed and have a known disease. So I think it's true that, and I also think it's true that even screening AMN men with MRIs is not always done. So it's, while we as a small group may be doing something regularly, it doesn't mean that that's being done regularly for the majority of patients.
I might just add a comment to that, is that it's actually done often very wrong. It's not uncommon to see a patient who had mutation analysis for ALD because of a family history of ALD without having had very long chains to see if he's basically affected or not, and then you have a mess, then you have the variant and you don't know if it's a disease causing. And we had patients coming to our clinic thinking they're gonna die because they have ALD and they had a completely different disease because of that. So that's certainly something that can be improved on a standard of care basis. There is a website called genematcher.com, I think, or genematcher.org. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. That's a website where you can go in. I guess currently there is only a physician portal. I'm not sure if there's a patient portal, although it's being developed, where you type in the variant in a gene, and it will search and see, is there anybody else who has reported in GeneMatcher the same variant? And then you can look up the phenotype. So it's sort of a it's like a match.com for people with the same genetic variant. So that's sort of the new thing that's coming out now.
It also often says on your gene report, right? So if you do the DNA testing, usually at the bottom it will tell you whether or not it's been reported. But since I have the microphone, I'm going to ask a question too. I do think that with newborn screening, the other thing that this group could focus on is getting it covered for mothers to then get tested, because we have patients, and I know in other diseases that I see, it can sometimes be, so now you have the baby diagnosed, this little boy. How do you get all the other people tested that should be tested? I understand that, but how do you get insurance to pay for it? And people, we see patients all the time, and I see them in my Duchenne clinic and other genetic clinics where we know exactly what they should get tested, but not everybody has the money to just pay for it. And I think that we should do a better job of providing the right documentation to help people get those, because many families, I mean, we have families that are followed at Mass General, best care, but they don't have their whole families tested, in part because people go to do the testing and they can't get it covered. I mean, we have women in our clinic, I know, that have, not had it done until they decided just to pay for it. But I think as a group, if we could, push on how, what do you do when you get this newborn screening? How do you figure out who needs to get tested? Who needs gene testing? Who needs very long chain fatty acid testing? And how do you tell how do you work with your insurance company? Because otherwise it can just stop, because they try to get it covered with their primary care and they can't figure out how to get it covered. And so then they just don't do it.
Okay, New York has a good model. Every baby that's picked up through newborn screening gets ABCD1. Gene test, that's first thing. And then following that, they send a sample to Baltimore for very long chain fatty acids. So we know that there is elevated very long chain fatty acids. We know there's a mutation in ABCD1. And then they're put in genetic counseling, and the mother gets the test. And the mother is told to contact her family, and if there's anybody else who needs testing, it gets done. So,
New York State covers all the targeted
right,
testing of the relatives.
not the relatives, but
That's her point.
yeah,
We,
but the baby gets the test.
this is an important question of access, I think, so maybe we're spending a moment. David Ralph is in the back from Transgenomic. David, do you have any a perspective on access to
genetic testing for individuals who have kind of a distant indication of a family relative. What's been the experience with your group in terms of getting insurance coverage for this kind of thing?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I know from our perspective, insurance coverage in general is very poor. And so when you start talking about distance people, the further away you get from the proband, the patient, the less likely you are to have it covered. So I know that companies such as ours, we develop tests such as, I think all of you know, whole exome sequencing. And under that umbrella, we will look at three, and all the companies do this, look at three siblings or three of the immediate family, and then further down the line in proband, in the family. So we'll look at aunts and uncles and all those other things. But in terms of coverage, though, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult arena at this point to get coverage. Not only, as I mentioned, the individual who's affected, but for the family members, it's next to impossible. So what companies are doing at this point is most of the companies have almost I would call a very flexible program, and so they look at the cost of the test and they try to minimize the cost to the patients as well. So there's programs in place where they try to limit out-of-pocket costs without losing money. So so in the end of the day, if it's a family that has to pay $300, some of the family members say, it's not worth it. And that's where it gets really, really difficult to try to have some form of balance between industry, insurance, and the healthcare providers. And everyone's kind of stuck in the middle.
So it's good to be the sound guy. You always have a spare mic, but I can't leave my seat. From an advocacy perspective, your question is, what should you do in 2016? I would suggest that as a group, we really try and figure out how to get on top of this situation. The ALD and so many of these other diseases are genetic. So let's acknowledge somewhere there's a genotype-phenotype correlation, or there's no correlation, but until we get that data, we don't know that. And what better place to start gathering and organize that data than in places like Neurobank and so on. Genetic testing is something that needs to have clinical validity. And I think that we as advocates and as families, as we can start to understand that better, we can also clamor for that too. Insurance companies haven't figured out genetic testing yet because there's so many uncertainties with it. But that's something that can change, just like newborn screening. It's a huge, huge thing. But I think that that's a place where pressure from a lot of directions can help. And I think that's a wonderful target. Families will get on board with this because it's something they can get their arms around, because they perceive that they'll get some phenotype correlation, and eventually they will. Maybe not in 2016, or maybe not in 97% of the genetic mutations, but in 2 or 3% they might, and that number will grow.
I agree with that as well. I think from the standpoint of what insurance companies look for, they look for really, and this has been going on, and I'm sure everybody knows, is evidence-based medicine. How will this help care for the patient? If you have a genetic test that's done, how will it help me choose a therapy? And then how will it help that therapy help to improve the health of the patient? Or how will it help make patient management decisions? And then there's the whole economics aspect of it. And I know insurance companies really need a lot of that data to support some of the payment, I guess you call them models from insurance companies. So I think that's where the trouble is for all of us, is trying to put that together.
I think on the plus side, just in the past half year, there's been a couple of good publications on showing that costs of next generation sequencing are the same or less than conventional routes of diagnosis, so that we can actually make cases to insurance companies by citing these publications that it costs less to just upfront do next generation sequencing, at least for the patient. There's not data on families, but at least for patients, that it's cheaper to go. And yeah.
Well, I better make sure I get on the phone with Aunt Susie, right? And I, as a provider, can't just start calling random people because it's a violation. But as this community, if they could at least say, oh, go to this page, and then it's all written out like what we would give them in clinic. You know, girls get this is how you do it, this is a letter, a sample letter you can give to your insurance company, then it would be easier, because I don't think the issue is always that it won't get approved. I think it's that it becomes the last priority because you're overwhelmed. And so I just think it'd be awful if some kid out there gets missed because we aren't making it easy enough to get the testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm what? Yeah, I'll go find them. I'll go track them down. No. Well, you can get it covered, because we just had a family that we got it covered in some 90-year-old woman in Omaha or something. So, but it's just talking to the right person.
So one thing I think is that it sounds like, next generation sequencing and those sorts of diagnostics may be very expensive, but family members would get almost as much information out of dried blood spots, which should be very inexpensive because we're doing them for newborn screening. And making a mechanism for that happen could be at least less expensive and probably easier.
Yeah, but at least then
It's
you would
80%
get-
of the women.
Yeah, you would get a huge
It's
chunk.
Yeah, but we're right now we're at 0, right? So if we could get it to all of the men and 80% of the women, it'd be huge.
I was going to ask, is it a feasible or helpful solution or project for 2016 for ALD Connect to, to harness all the genius power in this room and write a white paper that outlines the standard of care, which I know comes up in LCN context, et cetera, but in terms of extensive family testing, that we can then say that, all these people are signing this document, this is what we think has to happen to save lives.
Yeah.
And then people can take that to their insurance company and say, this is the experts of the experts that say it's necessary.
Two times, yes, and for transplant and for all the other questions that I completely agree. I think where we can again learn from other disease groups, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? I think it would be great if we can piggyback on similar guidelines that have been established, for Duchenne or for other patents.
You don't get it covered in Duchenne, but the advantage you have is that you can prove the women have symptoms. In Duchenne, the only way I get it covered is I tell all the moms, say you're having more kids. I don't care if you're never going to reproduce. You tell your doctor you want to have another baby, then you get it covered. But in this case, which you shouldn't put in writing because that's probably illegal, but in this case, you can prove that 30% have, right? 30% of women have symptoms, so therefore you are in an advantage over like
I don't think she works in my clinic.
But that's what I tell them, say you're reproducing.
Okay, Katie will draft first version of algorithm. Good. Sorry, I didn't want to cut off the discussion.
You had to.
Tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning with full force. Thanks, everybody.